So this is the exclusive right to lease. This is the form you'll use to list landlords' homes on the market to attract potential tenants. For the property, you'll want to get this information from the legal description as found in the county's tax record. So you can either use Matrix Realist Tax, or you could just look up the tax county's appraisal district on Google. All right, based on the tax roll, looks like lots 12 and 13 on block 1. So it'd be lots 12 and 13, block 1. And then what goes in the next is the legal description. So you have that already. So it'd be acre S.21. And then you paste that here. Known as, and then address and zip code, and then zip code. Landlord instructs broker to market the property with all of its fixtures and improvements and the following non-real estate items. So washer, dryer, fridge would go here, and then of course list anything that the landlord's removing. You would enter in what the monthly rental is going to be and how long the lease is going to be for. This actually dictates when the listing is going to start, when it becomes marketable, and when the listing will terminate. Here's the compensation. Typically it's 100% of 1 full month's rent typically. However, that's negotiable, but typically it would be 100% of 1 full month's rent, of which you would give 50% of that to the agent that attracts the tenant. This is if the contract gets renewed. A lot of the times nothing goes here. However, discuss with the landlord that if the property actually goes on the market for sale, what that would look like. Of course, you would need an exclusive right to sell. Protection period, I typically leave that blank. Whatever county your market center is located in, that's what's going to go here. This covers if you are going to list it on the MLS. And then these 2 boxes, you need to make a determination if it's going to be within 5 days or after 5 days. And if it's going to be after 5 days, you'll have to list the number of days after the listing agreement begins. So in this box, you'll determine how many days after the listing agreement begins that the home will go on the MLS, and the reason why it's going to be more than 5 days. Scheduling companies. So concierge services like showing time would more than likely go in this block. So you'd say showing time, unless you had another concierge service, or maybe you aren't using any scheduling companies. This is giving permission for you to put a key box on the property. MLS participants. So if the other broker representing the tenant is an MLS participant, how much are you going to pay them? And typically it's 50% of 1 month's rent. If they are a sub-agent, then how much are you going to compensate them? Typically 0. And again, if they're non-MLS brokers and they represent the tenant, 50%. And if they're a sub-agent that's also non-MLS broker, I typically leave 0. Intermediary status. This is going to allow anybody from your particular market center to bring the tenant. I strongly suggest allowing that to happen. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to represent both sides here. It just means that the broker potentially could have you listing it, and then the broker has another agent bringing the tenant. So go over this about make ready. This is about make ready if the broker is going to arrange for contractors, or if the broker's not. Typically you want to leave that up to the landlord themselves. Go over the landlord's representations. Typically nothing goes there. However, it's best advised for you to read the language of this agreement. Special provisions, you always want to communicate with your risk management officer. In Signature's case, KW Signature, it is Marilyn O'Neill. If the landlord wants to put anything here in special provisions, or if you get an idea to put something here, consult your risk management officer first. This is if any other addenda belongs to the listing agreement. So if the home was built before 1978, clearly you would need to make that selection and then fill out that addendum as well. Key box authorization, if there is a tenant already in there, you'll need to get that document filled out and signed. Now all this is going to be answered by the landlord. I mean, you fill this stuff out, and typically they're going to tell you what to put here. At what day of the month is rent due? What do the late charges look like? Typically first day of the month, typically an initial late charge of $50, and then $20 for every day after that. If pets are going to be permitted or not, and if so, what's the pet deposit look like? Anywhere from $350 to $500 is industry standard, and yet you're still going to want to get clarity from the landlord. What about a pet violation? So if they violate the pet agreement, what does that look like? Typically, it's an initial charge of $350 and $20 that the pet remains in the property. Security deposit is typically equal to a full month's rent. So if the monthly rent is $3,000, then the security deposit would be $3,000. Utilities, all utilities be paid by the tenant except, that's up to the landlord. Same thing with number of guests at the property, vehicles at the property, typically it's between 2 and 4. Trip charge is usually about $75. This means that the landlord has somebody to go service something at the home, and then the tenant, for whatever reason, doesn't allow entry. It's about $75. Now, typically, the tenant's going to be aware when somebody's coming by to service the home. Key box, authorized during the last 60 days. That means after in the last 60 days of the lease, the landlord is going to put on a lockbox on the property. And if the tenant wishes to withdraw that, typically the fee is a full month's rent. Inventory and condition form, this should be delivered within 5 to 10 days. That means the tenant has either 5 or 10 or however many days you decide here to go through the property, walk the property, and mark anything on that inventory and condition form. If anything's broken or there's any damage. Yard to be maintained by, typically it's the tenant or maybe there's a contractor involved. List the phone numbers for who the tenant needs to call for repairs. Typically I leave this blank. Consult your risk management officer if you have any additional questions about that. And that's it.